Hello, everyone. On behalf of the Collective Impact Forum, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Too Much Collective, Too Little Impact, brought to us by the Forum for Youth Investment. Thank you for joining us in this webinar, the second in a three-part series diving deeper into the content of articles in the Collective Insights on Collective Impact Supplement in the Fall 2014 Stanford Social Innovation Review. My name is John Kania, and I'm a Managing Director with FSG, one of the founding partners to the Collective Impact Forum, along with the Aspen Institute Forum for Community Solutions. The Collective Impact Forum exists to support the efforts of those who are practicing collective impact in the field. It is the place to find the tools and training that can help achieve success, as well as an expanding network of like-minded individuals coming together from across sectors to share useful experience and knowledge. We have a terrific program for you today with a tremendous group of speakers, but before we get started, I wanted to touch on a few items. Today's program is 60 minutes long, and you are encouraged to submit written questions and comments at any time during the presentation. Click on the General Chat tab at the bottom of your screen. Type your question in the box at the bottom of that space, and then click Send. Your questions are only visible to the presenters, and the presenters will verbally respond to as many questions as time allows during the Q&A at the end of the presentation. Also, please feel free to follow the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag #CollectiveImpact. At the conclusion of today's presentation, you'll be redirected to an online evaluation form. Please take a moment and complete the evaluation. We value your feedback. If you need technical assistance during the webinar, please call KRM Support at 800-775-7654. Today's slides will be available following the presentation at collectiveimpactforum.org. Today's content has been designed by the Forum for Youth Investment, one of the key partners of the Collective Impact Forum and a real leader in helping communities and states implement effective partnerships for over a decade. To kick things off, it's my pleasure to introduce Marita Irby, co-founder and chief operating officer of the Forum for Youth Investment. Marita?
I did want to have a chance to introduce our panelists today, and I'm thinking they're all here and on the phone with all the tech work we've done to prep for this call. Polly Lux-Page is joining us from Northern Kentucky, and she is a longtime educator and civic leader who's really steered the creation and growth of the Northern Kentucky Education Council as its first executive director. Also from Northern Kentucky, we have Marianne Schmidt-Hurt, who's a senior vice president of PNC Bank, and she chairs the board of the Education Council, where she really works with Polly to align this collective impact work and these initiatives in the education space across Northern Kentucky. Mark Stewart is president of the United Way of Bartholomew County in Columbus, Indiana, and he comes to us with over 20 years of experience in community development and human services. We're also joined today by Karen Pittman, who is co-founder and CEO here at the Forum. She's a sociologist and a really leading expert in youth development, and my colleague for 20-some-odd years now in doing this work. And Karen's really going to kick us off at the beginning here with a couple of comments, and then she'll be handling the questions at the end.
Thanks, Marita. So we're really delighted to be able to do this, and as John mentioned and Rita mentioned, the Forum's work in this collective impact space has focused on children and youth, and in that space over the years, what we have found is that as we go into communities talking about children and youth issues, and you're looking at a slide that talks about our theory of change, we find that communities really work on a host of issues related to children and youth, from third grade reading or coming into school ready to be successful, to obesity issues, teen pregnancy issues. There are a range of interrelated issues that really sort of add up to that children and youth care. What that means is that there are a host of strategies that communities are using to try to increase family, school, and community supports. And those can be everything from after school to increased access to health services to improving teacher quality. And as we began to look at how leaders were coming together to organize to really take these efforts to scale, what we found was that there's a natural tendency to have multiple initiatives or task forces or partnerships or coalitions or collaboratives that have come together really focused on moving particular strategies to get to certain outcomes. What you're going to hear today are two examples of communities that have really tried to increase their collective impact by looking at the fact that they have those multiple initiatives and figuring out concretely how to implement them. So I looking forward to the conversation and teeing up the Q&A at the end. Thank you.
So our agenda for today's call really is to have a couple of case studies and then have plenty of time for Q&A. So we're going to be starting with the Northern Kentucky Education Council, really zooming in on how they've aligned multiple partnerships with this kind of complex geographic footprint that they're operating in, and looking at what kind of impact it's had so far in terms of increasing investments and really tackling things like shared measurement in ways that are bringing partners together in some really new and powerful ways. We're also going to be hearing from Mark in Bartholomew County, looking at a very specific kind of conversation and facilitation technique that helps 3 different partnerships in the youth and education space think about how to align their goals and indicators and really look at ways to work together more effectively. Then we'll be following that with a good amount of time for Q&A. As we kind of kick this off, I want to turn it over for a moment to Polly, and my role in this is I'm a little bit of the interviewer in residence this morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. And I'm going to start by just asking Polly, before you get into the detail a little bit, can you just give us a couple of words about what the Northern Kentucky Education Council is all about?
Sure, thanks, and good afternoon, everyone. Pleased to be here and happy for this opportunity to talk about our work at the Council. So the Council is what some of you may know is a P20 Council, only I would say we've extended our work really now to embrace birth to career, and it was an outgrowth of a call to action by the community. We'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes, but we are what we consider to be a backbone organization, and as I said, we align education initiatives, birth to career, for our 6-county region that we serve. And I think one of the unique, or what makes the Council unique, is that we really do have this model of working cross-sector with business, education, and community partners. And we're all working toward common goals of increasing our progress along those established regional goals. So just a little bit about us. You can see our footprint there and the fact that we serve 18 public school districts, 3 post-secondary institutions, and approximately, it's a little bit more now, 85,085 students, what we call enrolled in the talent continuum.
Terrific. Thanks, Polly. Now, if you and Marianne could travel back in time with me for a moment, tell us a little bit about the dilemma that you were trying to address in Northern Kentucky. Why did you think that you really needed to align efforts?
Well, as you can see by this slide, and this is going back in time quite a bit, we did have several organizations all doing good work, doing excellent work, but there really wasn't an alignment of the work that they were doing. So we had our group, we're at the bottom of the slide, we were originally the Council of Partners, and then we had United Way of Greater Cincinnati, who was really working on achieving some bold goals, and specifically their Success by 6 initiative, which is with early childhood. And then the Northern Kentucky Chamber of Commerce had a group called Ed Alliance, working specifically with business partners and getting business engagement into our schools. Vision 2015 was our, not was, but still is, our group that really looks at what's ahead of us in the future for our whole region. So it's really it's a forward-thinking group of individuals, and it's really about changing our region. And then we have our Northern Kentucky Association of School Superintendents, which comprises 18 superintendents, and then Strive Together, which was just Strive, and they're in Cincinnati. So they serve the urban core in Cincinnati, which is just across the river from us, along with 2 urban districts in the council's footprint. So everyone had some specific work going on in the education arena. And so there were really many meetings, many agendas. I think I'm going to let Marianne speak to that about what it was like from her perspective as a corporate member to come to some of those meetings.
Thanks, Polly, and hello, everyone. I also am very happy to be able to participate in this, so thank you. And as Polly described, as a person from the business community, I found myself, interestingly, as Karen helped kick us off a few minutes ago, I think our community was an example of what she described, as we had a number of different initiatives, and I, as well as other community and business people, would find themselves in meetings talking about, with different organizations, sometimes 2 or 3 meetings over just a couple of weeks with 2 or 3 different organizations talking about the same things, where we would literally walk away and ask ourselves, didn't we just hear that with this other group? So ultimately, and probably the biggest issue, honestly, was it was all good work, several groups or organizations doing it, but all of them wanted money. So a few of our community's larger companies, I probably should say larger funders, really came together with Polly and some of the other organizations that Polly described to help coordinate and align these initiatives, because I mean, clearly we believed that there was a lot of room to be more efficient as a community, and that would ultimately help us be more effective and actually reach some of the goals that we were trying to attain.
Great. Thanks, Mary Ann. It's really sort of a story of it felt like it was more dissipating kind of efforts a little bit rather than the maximizing them. And there were so many players. How did you tackle bringing folks together? What were some of the key challenges that you had to address?
Well, what we can call them challenges, but really at the end of the day, they ended up being opportunities for all of us. If we think about definitions, we weren't all operating under the same dictionary, or thesaurus for that matter sometimes. So even just thinking about dropouts, and this work was really going on before, if you think about dropouts and you think about a graduation rate, this is before the national cohort graduation model had been defined and implemented. So a dropout in one district may mean something else to another district. And was it really about children were just dropping out, or did we lose track of them, or did they fade out, or had they gone someplace else and we didn't really know where they were? So we had a lot of opportunities around what would these common definitions be. In fact, what did it mean to be ready for kindergarten? And, you know, we went down the path of defining kindergarten readiness. So there were a lot of conversations, not just within the academic space, but and especially with our work with the Forum and Ready by 21, thinking along the lines of social emotional wellness and what did that mean for us as a community. So each of these boxes that you're seeing really gave us the opportunity to have very deep conversations with all of our stakeholders and do some defining around each of these and what it meant for us to move forward.
You also had some really nitty-gritty questions to kind of tackle along the way, like with all these overlapping geographies, what would the footprint really look like for joint work? Can you tell us how this kind of plays out, just with one example here in northern Kentucky?
So United Way and their work, especially with Success by 6 in early childhood, you can see they served 4 counties. And while that was good, it wasn't as comprehensive for us. We did have an outside evaluator come to northern Kentucky, and as you can see now, the Education Council was serving 6 counties, and our work was really defined by our 18 public school districts that we've always served, and that association of superintendents that I talked about. So we served the 6 counties, and then Vision 2015 served 9 counties, as you can see there, which was a little bit broader than our scope, and didn't really know if that was the most manageable for us. But when the outside evaluator came to town, the questions were really focused on, who had the most convening power, who had the depth and breadth of initiatives, and really initiatives that we could work all along that pipeline. So the council, at that point we were called the Council of Partners, really ended up being the organization that, as Marianne had alluded to, that community stakeholders felt could lead this work in a way that was much more efficient and that we would reduce duplication. So we landed on our footprint of these 6 counties, and I want to say that the counties themselves are very diverse. As you can see, we're at the top of Kentucky. We're right across the river from Cincinnati, but we have very rural communities within this footprint. We have urban and suburban. So it's a very unique geographic region for us.
but figuring out what to do with kind of multiple geographies and jurisdictions. I think this is a story that we hear from a lot of places, and how to be able to really tackle that. Let's get back to the structure piece a little bit. How did these partners realign as you kind of worked through with that outside consultant and others coming in to think about, well, how can we become more efficient in terms of how we're tackling this work?
Well, every single partner listed on this slide had some very robust and good work going on. Vision 2015, the education implementation team, was really that broad look across the region to say, what did we need? What do we really need to move our region forward? So not really thinking that it would be in place forever, but it certainly was gaining a lot of momentum. So how could we take the work of the education implementation team, how could we look at the chamber and the work they were doing, and look at all of this work and say, how are we able to align it in a way that makes sense for all of us? And there were a lot of conversations because clearly stakeholders value their work, and so we really weren't asking anyone to abandon work. It was, let's just do the work under this one organization, this umbrella, where we felt like we could make more collective impact, and continue what you're doing, but let's align your work on teams with others that make sense as we work toward common progress.
This is where the regional educational goals that the Education Council was focused on kind of brought things in for people to kind of partner and align under those goals. And that's also when the name change came, yeah?
Yes. So you can see we went from the Council of Partners to the Northern Kentucky Education Council, and we went through a branding process. And our regional education goals were established through that Vision 2015 work, but what we really need to do was take those goals back out to the community. We couldn't just make the assumption that we were still operating with the right goals, so we took them back out to the community. We had, I think, 3 or 4 community meetings and vetted the goals again to make sure that they were the right goals. And so what you see now is how you see our goals listed there. Everyone said you can't argue with any of the goals, and they think they're going to help us get to where we want to be. We assigned action team co-chairs to each of these goals, and so those are our 6 action teams. And each of our action team co-chairs really have convening power in their own right, and they're leaders in the community. So this work of the action team, what you see now, that really is the heartbeat of our work at the council and across the region.
We also had the leadership, kind of strong leadership structure come in over those goals. And then one of the other things you talked about is how, as new initiatives came into the region, how they aligned with those goals.
Well,
just a word about that.
Well, I want to say one thing about the leaders, because for us working with the forum and the opportunity to work with Ready by 21, and United Way had already ventured into a partnership with the forum. So all of our partnership with the forum came at just the right time for us, because if you remember that the three gears that we saw at the very beginning, and I'm not just doing this as a commercial, I really do believe this wholeheartedly, those 3 gears have really propelled our work, and they resonate with everyone, because we realized we had to work with our leaders in our community in order to really change our outcomes. So for us, it was looking at those 3 gears. It's a theory, but we're able to apply that theory to our work in a real and practical way. So you can see now our action teams, and then at the bottom, some of these are programs and initiatives that we hold at the council, and we give oversight to those. And having Strive together in our region as well, we partner where it makes sense for us. So the early grade reading campaign was an opportunity for us to partner so we could address children across the tri-state region, so in Cincinnati and in Kentucky, with that end goal being 3rd grade reading, every child reading on grade level by 3rd grade. And then some of these are our other initiatives, which I won't go into right now, but we hold these initiatives and these programs at the council.
Terrific. And then just thinking about, what are the results so far? What have you seen as a result of this alignment? Marianne, I think you were going to kick us off talking a little bit about the kind of investments.
Yeah, and I would just say Polly talked about our regional education goals, And those goals have really guided our work. The goals are clear, and they've helped us stay on track. And this is still an opportunity for us today, as there are so many good programs and initiatives, but we can't do them all. So our action team leaders really help make sure that whatever we take on, the work that we do, stays aligned to those goals. And what that has done has really brought clarity around our work for the community and for our funders. So our budget, and we're still relatively young in this new umbrella organization, that 4 years ago we had a budget of about $50,000. Today it's about $500,000, and the bulk of that growth has come from corporate funders. And again, I believe it's the structure that we've put in place, and the goals have really guided that. One thing that's really exciting as well is we are now at a place where there are some major organizations, major funders, different funds that if they're approached by someone to support anything related to education, they actually call us. And most importantly, with regard to results and outcomes, by becoming more efficient, it's really helped drive us toward the results and help us make progress toward those goals. And I think Polly's actually going to touch on some of the specific numbers around literacy and some other things. So Polly, I'll turn that back to you.
Okay, thanks. So our second year, if we really think about our opportunity, access, and what supports are in place all across that pipeline, starting, as I said before, at birth to career. And just one primary example of this opportunity. So you heard me speak about the early grade level reading campaign. Well, we were already measuring the number and percentage of our children who are reading on grade level by third grade, because we know that's critically important for them to have future academic success. So our one-to-one practicing reading with students is a program that we have and that we give oversight to. And so we started that as a pilot with 4 elementary schools, and we've grown to 42 elementary schools. We have 57 elementary schools across those 18 public school districts. We run each year over 400 coaches. And not only do we have adult coaches, a couple of our districts also have high school coaches, youth coaches, and it's benefiting not only the children being coached, tutored, but also the high school students as well. So it's a combination of adults and high school students. And across all of the time that we've been measuring data, we collect pre, interim, and post data for all of our students to measure their progress. 88% of our children have made continuous progress toward reading on grade level. And then the other, do you want me to go on, Marita?
I think I would probably just highlight on the other that on each of those points that you can see up there, there's been at least a 10% shift in what the gains or reductions have been. So you are really starting to get some traction in terms of actual outcomes.
Yes, so that you're talking now about the third box, so our outcomes. Mm-hmm. This is all about working towards those outcomes. So we do measure our students who are graduating on time, and those were the most recent data, and then, of course, our college and career readiness, and the children, we're seeing less and less of our children require remediation.
So I think the one thing that we wanted to say, thank you so much, both Polly and Marianne, for giving us the story to kind of hook into a little bit, and we're going to come back to this more in the Q&A, and maybe at that point we can talk a little bit more about the what's next in terms of how you're bringing partners together in a whole new way around shared measurement, not just shared measurement goals, but actually what are some systems to be able to undergird that. So if it's okay, can we loop back on that during the Q&A portion?
Sure.
Terrific. So with that, we're going to turn to one other story. And again, thank you both, Polly and Marianne. And now, Mark, you're going to be up in just a moment. I do want to highlight one thing about kind of major takeaways. And this was in the article that John referred to around how you really align these efforts. And there were several things that we talked about there about how do you start with a focus on the outcomes you want to achieve, how do you draw a picture that's big enough so that partners can see where they connect into that picture, how can you really find places where there's more efficiency efficiency and power coming together rather than working alone, and how you clarify the lines of communication and accountability. In this last story, we heard a lot about 2, 3, and 4. And how they brought people together and really worked to increase that efficiency and accountability. As we turn to the next story, we're going to be kind of going back to the beginning a little bit and say how did a group, much as they did in Northern Kentucky, but we're going to look at more detail, come together around the outcomes that they wanted to achieve as the starting point. And so that's where we're turning to Mark and hearing about the work in Bartholomew County, Indiana. Mark, you with us still?
I am.
Terrific. Can you tell us a little bit about Bartholomew County and the partnerships in search of impact?
You bet I can. Well, first of all, hello everyone. And Bartholomew County, we're a small town with big aspirations. Just a bit of quick background. We've got a population of about 77,000, predominantly white, good-sized ethnic population for a small Midwestern town. What's a little unique about it is we are the world headquarters for Cummins Engine Company, which is a little unique for such a small town. Cummins is a Fortune 200 company, and on a per capita basis, we have more mechanical engineers than anywhere else in the U.S. And we have a very strong economy, actually one of the top 10 economies in the nation. But one of the things that really serves to do is it's fantastic for the community, but it does tend to kind of exaggerate the socioeconomic gap that we have. So in our community, we do have a fair amount of wealth, but one of the things that's kind of come out is that we've become very good at hiding the poverty within the community. We actually have about 42% of the kids are on free and reduced lunch, and we have childhood poverty rates that actually approach about 50% in some of our core neighborhoods. The good news is that poverty is increasingly recognized and is more and more on the community agenda, and people are coming together around that. We have lots of different organizations committed to helping kids do better. And the real challenge that we have is we've got all these organizations doing good work, but not always doing the good work together. And we have 3 high-level kind of organizations that are organizing groups of people. We had the Council for Youth Development, the Community Education Coalition, and the United Way, all working around kind of education and childhood development issues. And so, first of all, the Council for Youth Development, predominantly composed of social service providers and educators, focusing really on kind of the whole child development. Lots of discussion about the social emotional well-being. And so they did really good work, but, the question about do we have the right people in the room is always the question, if everybody in the room agreed to change something in the community, would it happen? And the answer to that question for the Council for Youth Development is probably not. So that was one of the groups we work with. Another one, the Education Coalition, is kind of on the other end of the spectrum. You guys, a very well-funded organization. The board of directors is really the movers and shakers of the community. A well-respected board, kind of a who's who of community leaders. The thing that they really lack is kind of the lived experience. They don't have a lot of exposure to poverty and the issues that kind of challenged kids face on a day-to-day basis. And they were heavily focused on high school graduation rates and academic achievement. From their perspective, they really come at it from the fact that the future economy depends on having a skilled workforce, and that the biggest threat to our collective community well-being is the future labor pool, and really wanted to hit that academic achievement piece of it hard with the high school graduation rates, but didn't talk a lot about the social emotional kind of well-being of children. And then there's the United Way, us, and from our perspective, we invest a lot of money each year into education and early childhood, probably about 40% of our total kind of community investments in that area. And we always wanted to make sure that we're do everything that we can to make sure we're investing in the right organizations in the right amount. And so from our perspective, of all these different organizations that are out there, how do we make sure we're making wise community investments? So the big question that we really had is, by working together in a highly collaborative fashion, could we create a catalytic effect? And that was when we turned to the forum for some help.
So we're going to try to tell you a story. We're going to tag team this just a little bit. If we're trying to say, well, how do you get leaders working together on the same page, where we're going to tell you some 5 steps. Mark's going to walk you through this, but just what we did to help people really start with the outcomes and the indicators that they cared about, kind of balancing out that picture, as you said. So you have social, emotional health as well as academic and some other things. Doing some vote with dot exercises, that kind of thing. Looking at what really the root causes and underlying conditions were for each indicator. Thinking about how to find common causes, common areas for action by doing a clustering technique, which we'll show you in just a minute. And then really moving from those, if these are common causes that we need to address, how do we take action in those things, and what are the starting points? So, Mark, you're going to walk us through. It's a complex story, as this work is complex, but we've tried to kind of boil it down and have some images that will help you understand that story so far. So this is one of the pages you started with.
Yeah, and so with the Education Coalition, the Council for Youth Development, United Way, we all had kind of our plans, so to speak, on what we wanted to achieve and measures and things like that. And they were not inconsistent, but they were not the same. And as the last slide said, really trying to get everyone on the same page. We all came together and decided to start with the one that United Way had put together. And the main reason we chose that is because it had pretty high communication value, and it was a pretty good place to start. So we have all these people in the room, and the introductions go well. And then the first thing that came up was our original title was Education. And the first people that kind of piped up, so to speak, was the Council for Youth Development. And they said, well, education's important, academic achievement's important, but we really want to focus on the whole child. And from my perspective, I thought that was a really good comment, but I was just a little dismayed. It's like, wow, we all come together and we didn't even get past the title before people wanted to had some comments on this. But it turned out to be a very good thing. So we were already identifying specific program measures because we wanted all of our partners to see how their work contributed to the overall picture. And, one of the best things that we accomplished was really by putting individual program names out onto the chart. Everyone could see kind of exactly where they fit into the scheme, so to speak, what strategies they were supporting. So that was helpful in kind of bringing people together so they could kind of rally around this and say, okay, this is something we can get behind. And as the conversation kind of developed and matured, and the cradle to career continuum, it started to get a little wider. So we hadn't originally talked about babies being born healthy, but that was one of the things that came up really quickly. Let's start at the very, very beginning. And then also kind of at the other end of the cradle to career, really focusing on how do we make sure kids transition out of high school and into post-secondary or into the job market. So really, originally it wasn't a full cradle to career continuum, but that's where it ended up. The main measure that we had in place originally was third grade reading scores, but then of course the question came up, there's got to be a few things that happen between third grade and high school graduation. And then, we really started to kind of delve into the different measurements. So we have these high-level indicators like third grade reading scores or academic achievement, but then, all of the social-emotional indicators start to come out, particularly from the Council for Youth Development. If these kids are hungry, how are they going to achieve in school? If they don't have the emotional supports, if they don't have adequate mentoring, all the social-emotional kind of indicators really started to come out. We put those all down and then started working them into the into the diagram. So we ended up with really just a great big pile of indicators, and they all had their value, but at the end of the day, we had to narrow it down to ones that were really kind of the strongest indicators, and those we believed were going to be kind of the biggest levers for change, so to speak. And in order to decide which ones of those were the most important, we did kind of a vote with dots exercise, and that was really everyone kind of gets 3 sticky dots, and you put your dot on whichever indicators you believe are the most important that we really should be tracking and watching. You can use all 3 dots for one, or you can spread your dots out.
Yeah. So we then took some of those and basically said, how do we unpack them? What are the results that we're seeing, and what are we seeing here in Bartholomew County? I'm just going to tag through this part pretty quickly here and say then on the previous page you'd seen those indicators kind of pop up in different colors. And here, basically each group took the thing they cared about, 8th grade reading or whatever, and unpacked it and said, why do we think these are things happening here in Bartholomew County? And as they started doing so, they started finding some things in common across the different groups, like a lack of parent and family supports. No matter which indicator they started with, that was something that came up that they wanted to address together. There were other ones as well. Education and training, kind of opportunities that didn't connect to careers, transportation often insufficient. And then what we saw as the group did the whole work is that looking at kind of the specific things, they started grouping into some common areas. Mark, any comments that you want to make in terms of the kinds of things that you saw the group surface?
Well, I think, it's important to kind of point out is this is really a lot of kind of where the magic started to happen, when people could see their organizations and their indicators, and they could kind of see what they cared about, and then the people that they worked with and other organizations on a database caring about the same things but in a different way. It really started to kind of bring out this idea of, okay, I can start to see how my organization is important, but they started to think less about what was best for their organization and more about, okay, what is best for this community cause that we all care a lot about.
So where the magic starts to happen is when we see the connections in the work. And what Mark challenged me to do, as we go back to that story of how we took people through this process, is once upon a time Mark said to me, can you get this all together on a page? I can see the clusters, I can see the dots, but I'd like to see kind of some of the lines and connections, because we really actually want to know if we're making a difference. So here's how it came together on a page. You've seen a lot of these words before, and so it's tiny print here, but see if you can follow along. We had some big community goals. Within those, we had some priority outcomes that we'd expanded along that whole age continuum and around social, emotional, and other areas of measurement and health that we wanted to have. We looked at what the indicators should be for those, and then each group unpacked and got to very detailed about why we weren't doing better on some of those things in Bartholomew County. So we unpacked those and then looked at how they clustered. So you had things like parent and family supports, the detail you just saw on the last page, as well as several other areas. What was nice about it, though, is you could then see the connection back. I could say, if these are things I'm working on, I can see the connection back to the indicators that I care about. So there was transportation, there was language, things around basic needs, a whole range of areas that the groups were saying, we could actually come together and try to tackle that together in a way that our individual organizations or coalitions couldn't do alone. A lot of areas for potential action. But even then, you had to get to how do we prioritize? What are the starting points? Mark, word on getting started?
Yeah, where we really kind of picked up a lot of energy was around kind of the three kind of work groups. One was about family supports, another was about expanded after-school learning, and then the third area was transportation. And I think everyone thought those were good ideas, but they were the ones that really had the energy to move forward, and we felt that energy was really important to capture and move forward.
So a story on a page of how we got from outcomes to action. I wouldn't say there were 5 easy steps. There were 5 very detailed steps, but it was about kind of where the group could go in terms of joint action. And I think, again, probably a part of the Q&A conversation can be a little bit of so what difference have we seen as a result of that work? So in this one, again, major takeaways we really focused on were the outcomes and the big picture kind of approach to this, and where could we come together with more power than the work we could do alone. At this point, we really do want to turn to Q&A, and we've seen a lot of questions coming over the transom, and so I'm going to hand back over to Karen to walk us through some of the questions that have come in and engage Polly, Marianne, and Mark in that discussion.
Hi. Thanks for giving me the questions. We've got so many great questions that have come in. We're going to be hard-pressed to get through them all. So let me start with some that have come in that are really about sort of the nuts and bolts. It's easy when you're telling the story to make it sound very neat, but we know that this is messy work and hard work and work that takes time. So, Mark, let me just start with you. How long did this process that the forum helped you go through take, and where would you say you hit points where there was a little bit of tension or things that really had to be resolved?
I mean, I would say that the big answer is the work continues to evolve as more people kind of get involved, and it really is very much 3 steps forward and then one step back. But what you get with that kind of evolution is more people coming to the table and a deeper understanding. When we first put this out, one of the issues is, United Way is a funder of this, so people kind of have an incentive to get on, but it does raise a little bit of a conflict. And so I think in the beginning people took it a little bit at face value, but then the more they dug into it, the more they became more and more genuinely committed to it. I would say the bulk of the work happened probably over about a 3 to 6 month period of getting kind of community ownership over it.
And there have been a couple of questions about whether, both for you, Mark, and for Polly, about whether you all needed some training or orientation in collective impact in order to get this work started, whether you got that by coming into a special training session or whether you got that by having facilitators. What help did you get in being able to do this alignment work?
Okay, Mark, I'll answer, and I guess you can. So for me personally, what did help is knowing our community so well. And, sort of that old saying, knowing where the bones are buried. So that helps when you want to bring folks to the table. So that was one piece of it. And then the other piece, quite frankly, I think I mentioned before, was really the lift that we received from the forum and being able to be involved in the Ready by 21 community process. Because much like Mark, we had outcomes. We knew what our outcomes were, but we did need help in facilitating in a way, thinking about, okay, we have our goals. Now, what are our outcomes, specific outcomes, and what are those indicators that we can all agree on that we're going to measure our outcomes? So the trainings that we had and the convenings from the Forum and Ready by 21 staff really did help us in that particular arena with the facilitation of those conversations and what drilling down and what that looked like.
Good. Another question that's come up is not all initiatives are equal. Paula, you mentioned that these were all existing initiatives that were strong, but in the end, you ended up with one sort of umbrella initiative. And Mark, you can speak to this as well. You don't have to tell us which one, but what happens when you have some initiatives that are more mature or have more money or are more successful? Is there messiness involved in the alignment process itself when you've got folks at the table that may all have equal passion but not necessarily equal capacity or reach, or they haven't all been in business for the same amount of time?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, it's been my experience that this work is always very, very messy. We end up with kind of lovely charts and strategy maps, but, my experience is that the work is always very, very messy. That doesn't mean it's necessarily contentious. It does get that a little bit at times, but it really does take just very, very, very proactive communication. And it's always about, kind of building a bridge. You've got some organizations that have more resources, they move quicker than others, and others that move slower. So you can't move at the speed of the fastest, and you can't move at the speed of the slowest. You really have to find where you have opportunities to come together, and you got to move at the speed that's really right for the community. And a lot of the role that I think United Way and the leaders in the organizations play is moving forward at the right speed. We constantly kind of have to either put on the accelerator or put on the brakes, and that's one of the key decisions that we make on an ongoing basis is what speed to go at.
I agree with that. I think I think Mary Ann talked about this before. When we really were able to fine-tune our messaging so that our messaging is crisp, it's clear, folks understand, and at the end of the day, I don't want this to sound hokey, but at the end of the day, it really is what's in the best interest of our children, our youth, and our young adults, and staying on point and being very strategic in our focus and our thinking. It's like we can't go toward the next new shiny object. So keeping people in the fold, if you will, and knowing that every single organization, while there are turf issues, and I'm not going to say that there aren't because that would be naive if I said that, but while we do have turf issues, oftentimes it could be turf, it could be funding, it could be all of those things, but just staying on point and staying focused, because that's what really is helping us move forward in a way, and knowing that each person at the table is contributing. You know, we might not be able to make that direct attribution, but we can always cite the contribution, and that's one thing that we've done is we always cite the contribution of all of our partners.
Right. Let me dig in a little bit on speak to a couple of questions that have come up. Marianne, I think you mentioned that at this point you've gotten to the place where when there's a new idea or a new sort of initiative that gets introduced from the outside that comes to town, folks are bringing that initiative to the council. This is the table where people assume if there's something new to work on, rather than building a new initiative on the side, they come to the table. Have there been any instances in which that didn't happen, and what do you all do when someone decides to go it alone?
You know what? I don't know that we've had any instances where anyone has kind of gone rogue lately with an educational initiative. I mean, now we have gotten to that place with the majority of the community, I would say, and Polly, jump in here anytime, that I'm sure there are things that go on that we are not a part of, but I will tell you from, it's kind of like we talked about in a couple different ways. The major funders in our community are very aware of the council, and the majority of them know that, again, if it's an education-related initiative, they're asking us or coming to us. And I'm honestly not aware of when that hasn't happened lately. Now, that was a long time coming, though. I mean, it took, it's been a very short 4 years, and it's been a very long 4 years in many ways. As, Polly kind of touched on, not really turf wars, but, initially there were some territory discussions, for lack of a better word. So, I mean, this just didn't happen overnight. It's taken us a while to get here, but now I don't think we really have anyone that's kind of gone off on their own. I mean, Polly, are you aware of any?
No, earlier we had a few heavy conversations, but I think Marianne's point, over the 4 years, we're really starting to see everything move forward in a way that, I'm like Mark, it's slow, it's all those things, but also, we get up every day hopeful. So
yeah.
That's a big piece of it.
I would totally agree with that. I think, to me anyway, kind of the tipping point of this work around the convening is really, when does it, in the eyes of the community, when is it unacceptable kind of not to be at that table, so to speak? And, we've reached that place in Bartholomew County, and it really is a huge tipping point. And, the other side of that coin is when it's recognized that other kind of key players should be at that table and they're not. And then that kind of begs the question, okay, you've got all these other strong stakeholders around the table, but that one that's over there, they're not necessarily going rogue, but they really ought to be involved. And then that kind of positive peer pressure to bring them to the table is just, to me, that's the real tipping point of that, of the work, and when you really got a solid platform to launch forward.
And I just want to add one more thing. That we did have an example recently that turned out to be an incredible opportunity for us as well. But we had an opportunity. It's a program, and so the creator of the program was going around talking to some folks to gather some interest, and at the end of the day, it really filled a gap for us. We had to do due diligence about the program and the service provider, all of those things. But the question that he kept getting from everyone he talked to, all the corporate folks, was, well, what's your connection to the council? Are you involved with the council? Is this part of the council's work? And so when partners in the community start asking those questions, that's what we knew. It was like, okay, we know we've come around a bend now for sure, which has been very helpful.
Good. So I think Marianne, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, no, go ahead. That's fine.
I think what we're hearing, and this is good news for those who are at the early stages, is there's a lot of messiness. There are tough conversations that happen at the beginning. If you stay true to what the overall goals are that you've done, and you've done that early process to really make sure everybody was heard before you landed, that slowly but surely the momentum gets to build. I want to ask a couple of questions about that. One question is, and Polly, I'll ask you first since you've been at this longer, talk a little bit right now about what the staffing is to support this work, and the action teams. You mentioned the co-chairs. Are those co-chairs volunteer? Are they paid? And what do you do to make sure the action team's work isn't happening in silos, but it actually aligns? How does continuous communication happen across those teams?
Okay, so we have 4 staff. And one of our staff is part-time. One of the staff is a loaned executive for about 3/4 of her time as a loaned executive to us, and then we buy the remainder of her time through council dollars. Myself, and then I have an executive assistant, and she also is our office manager. So we have a very small staff, as you can see. But what we've done with our action teams, each of our action team co-chairs, this is all volunteer for them. While it might fit into their work, it's still volunteer because they're convening action teams outside of their regular work. So each of us, not my assistant, but the rest of us, we all are liaisons to the action team. So that's one thing that we are constant in making sure that a staff member is always at an action team meeting, and we know what's going on in those meetings all the time so that we can keep that communication loop open. Our action team co-chairs as a group function very well, and most of them have been hanging in here for the past 4 years. We've had 1 or 2 move, but it was only because of a shift in job requirements, or they may have actually moved from the region. So other than that, they've been steadfast in this work for us. So our action team co-chairs meet quarterly together as a group. And we didn't always do that, but knowing that, it holds us accountable too. So it holds staff accountable as well as our action team co-chairs accountable. And so we have established meetings across the year where they do a sharing across action teams. And there's a lot of cross-pollination across the action teams, and that's really important to note too. But so while they're assigned toward not really assigned, but they're working towards specific goals, there's much work that does go across action teams. And sometimes a person in the community may decide to be on more than one action team. But we do meet with them regularly, communicate with them regularly, and that's the reason our action teams work so well and they're so cohesive. And we also convene large council meetings, and we do that 2 to 3 times a year. So we just had one a week ago. And at that, our action teams report out to the community. So we have several communication processes in place to make sure that we do have that continuous communication loop.
Okay. Good. Let's shift gears and talk a little bit about data and accountability. These things have a lot of moving parts. You're working with programs and systems that collect data differently. You have action teams that have set different strategies that they're hopefully holding themselves accountable for trying to move forward. How do you think about accountability? Where does data fit into this? Do you have systems?
Are you asking me?
I'm asking you, and then I'll turn to Mark.
Okay.
Mark, this has been asked less time. I've got a different question for him. Let's start with you, Polly.
I just want to make sure. So really the data's been so important to our work, and we started out like many folks do, and I was listening to Mark's different groups and thinking about how that all operates for him in his world, and thinking about the data that we collect. So we collect a lot of academic data, but we also collect that social emotional data as well. And then we want to start thinking about, well, what other data should we be collecting or could we be collecting? So Community Systems Group has a platform that we've used really under the auspice of the forum and Ready by 21, a platform where we input all of our data all of the action team data, so everything that's going on within the action teams, plus we put in council data. So when we look at that data, we can say, all right, now what have we accomplished over the course of this past year? And then we have the opportunity right now, as we are the pilot for the nation, in partnership with the Forum and SAS, about building this 3-gear platform. So now, if you remember those 3 gears, we're able to think about those 3 gears and what data resides within each of those 3 gears, and it's in a platform that will have predictive analytics applied to it. And then for us, this is the real win. So all of the data from our programs are going in there. All of the data from all of our partners are going in there. So all these different data sources of data are being put into this platform, and this really, in the future, is what's going to guide our investments. It's going to help us think about the impact of our work. It's really the value add for us as a community. So while it's under the council umbrella, it really is for the community. So we have the newest piece of data that we're going to put in, the 2 new sources of data, are going to be transportation and health, because we haven't been collecting those particular data, but we have partners that do. So I just keep thinking about it as a program landscape on steroids. If we think about we're going to make investments, where do they make sense to make those investments, and if we don't invest in those places, what will happen to our children, youth, and families in those communities where we're not investing? And it's an opportunity like nothing that we've ever received before, and this will show the contribution from all of our partners. So you might not be able to make that attribution link back, but it is about everyone's contribution to where we're going as a region.
Good. Mark, I know you're earlier in this phase, but you made a shift when you took the United Way Education Council, which was really sort of measuring itself in terms of progress with programs and organizations and grantees, and bumped it up into this collective impact space. How are you all thinking about data and accountability?
Well, first of all, I can't wait till Polly finishes that platform, because that sounds absolutely fantastic. So we collect a lot of data, and we're very early in the process. Is actually kind of where we are right now as far as kind of figuring out where these issues are. We think we know what the key indicators are. We think we know how or have an idea anyway of how those relate to each other, and we've gathered all of that information and formatted it. The question really is, one of the things that we're working on long term is really how do we connect that with also kind of data around financial stability. From our perspective, kind of the golden metric is kind of high school or post-secondary attainment, and then how that connects to future workforce. So our big goal that's going to take us probably 5-6 more years to get to is this one community scorecard or dashboard that really connects health data, financial stability data, and education, and how they all intersect with each other. We're a long way from that, but that's kind of our great big vision kind of thing.
Wonderful. Well, I think we're out of time for questions. We certainly didn't get a chance to speak to all of the questions, and we've probably raised more questions as we've talked than we've answered. But this is obviously complicated and important work. Data is a huge part of it. Figuring out how to make that data visible and accessible is a part of it. And we're delighted that we've had the opportunity to work with these 2 communities, and we'll try to handle some of these questions offline. But now let me turn this back to John for a closing comment.
Great. Thanks, Karen, and thanks to all of you for joining us today for Too Much Collective, Too Little Impact. We hope you enjoyed the presentation, and a very special thank you to our panelists during today's event, Polly Lusk-Page, Mark Stewart, Marianne Schmidt-Hurt, Marita Irby, and Karen Pittman. To continue the conversation on collective impact, we invite you to join us in the third webinar in this series early next year with veterans from the field. This will be January 20th, 2015. It'll be called, it's about the community, why community engagement and process matter in collective impact. So a very important aspect to this work, and one that following the questions came up a lot, was community engagement, and that's what this will be about. You can register for this event through Collective Impact Forum's website. And as a reminder, we ask you to take a moment and complete the evaluation that will appear momentarily on your screen. Your comments and suggestions are important to us as they help us to provide you with future quality programming. You can find today's PowerPoint slides as well as links to the Aligning Collective Impact Initiatives article on www.collectiveimpactforum.org. And thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to continuing the conversation.